Previous to coming to Detroit to work for the automotive industry, I used to work for consulting. I traveled around the world, visited more than 6 countries, and worked for 10 different industries. Once I decided to settle down, stop the traveling, a phrase that caught my attention and resonated with me a lot was the phrase Detroit versus everybody. I saw the people, I saw the vibe, I saw where they were trying to go, and I just wanted it to be part of bringing Detroit back and the comeback of the city. And I decided to take the risk, and I came to Detroit by chance. And now I can proudly say after some years that we're not coming back, we're back, period.
Being in and around all this great culture and history, and specifically Woodward Avenue, which really for car people is like Broadway for actors. Last year, as Haggerty brought the Concours d'Elegance down into the city onto Woodward Avenue, and as we were driving classic cars on Woodward, it brought me back to 17 years ago, the first time I visited my new adoptive hometown, and I got the same chills of being in this fantastic city on that great street.
I graduated from the University of Michigan in 2009 and had the opportunity to return to Ann Arbor in 2020 to run the local office for Hylant. I love the city. I most certainly bleed blue, but it wasn't always that way. I went to my first Ohio State-Michigan game in 1995, and I sat in my grandfather's seats in the Michigan alumni section, head to toe in Ohio State gear. That day, Tim Biakabatuka broke the single-game rushing record. Michigan crushed Ohio State, and I left the stadium crying. How times have changed. Go blue.
I was living in Seattle before I joined General Motors, working for Apple during COVID, and my wife and I had just an idea of returning back to Detroit. We're both born and raised here. You know, never having worked in the city, just leaving after college, we were kind of talking about how do we get back to the city. As luck would have it, about a month after we had that initial conversation, I got a phone call from General Motors, and the rest is history. So it's just an interesting way to kind of see how you can never really plan these things, but we're so excited to be back in the city.
So my grandparents are the reason I do what I do. They inspired my love of Detroit and my desire to make a positive change. One of my earliest memories is visiting them at their co-op in Lafayette Park. They were organizers. She was a stay-at-home mom who taught her kids how to stuff literature and knock doors. He started as a Catholic priest who organized around race relations in Pontiac and Detroit. And by the time I knew them, they were in their 40s. It was their second marriage. She had become an executive director of a nonprofit, something she achieved without a college degree. And he had left the priesthood to go to law school and become a housing attorney. He worked with tenants who were facing eviction. They taught me the importance of people and of place, which is a lesson that I hope to share with my 2 kids.
In 2017, I was awarded Officer of the Year with Detroit Police. At my award ceremony, I met Chief Craig. I had a few drinks, and I told him that I was coming for his job. The next thing I know, I get a hand on my shoulder, and I turn around and it's Chief, and he says, I need you in my office on Monday. To be quite frank, I thought I was gonna lose my job. Well, it comes to find out he wanted me to become his bodyguard. And so that's how my career as Chief Craig's bodyguard first began.
When I was 20 years old, there was a company that took a chance on me. The leader of that company was a lady by the name of Kathy Schweitzer. Kathy saw some potential in me and took me under her wing and taught me how to run a brokerage. She and her husband Paul ended up selling that company, and I started what is known as today as the Glover Agency, but we reconnected more recently in the last year, and it's amazing how life is full circle because she is now one of my leaders as the director of sales for our parent company.
Ironically, I started my professional career as a security officer at Fairlane. So I had many mentors in my life, even though at the time you don't see it as a mentorship, but looking back at it now, I'm very fortunate for the people that noticed my skill sets and my abilities and pushed me towards places that I feared going into or had no knowledge of, but was able to absorb the knowledge.
So the way I started my career at Carmela Foods was I was graduating from Michigan State at the business school, and I thought maybe I'd get a position in finance or maybe even go to law school. At the time, working for my uncle at Carmela Foods in the summers, and he ended up offering me a position. And he said, why don't you try this out for a couple years? If you like it, there'll be a career for you. If not, I'll help you with the next job. So I thought about it for a little while, and I ended up taking the job. Fast forward 18 years later, and now I'm the CEO and part owner, and it's my dream career, dream job, and I've made the right choice.
Before I got into real estate, there was a landlord of mine at one of the businesses that my family owned, and he was sweeping the parking lot, and I went out to him while he was sweeping and said, hey, if I ever want to own a building like this, what do you recommend I do? And he said, close your eyes and imagine the area, and if it's going to get better within the next 20 years, do it, and if it's going to get worse or the area is going to become more distressed, stay away from it. And it's actually really good advice.
You know, you never know where life's going to take you. I did not at 30 years old know that I'd be pivoting from real estate to the insurance industry. It came up, a family friend of mine from another firm actually reached out to me to meet up for drinks with his team. That same night, I ran into a buddy of mine who works at Locked In, and he's like, what are you doing? You're interested in insurance? Like, you should be talking to us too. Like, come on. So, and then 3 months later, there I was, and I joined the Locked In team.
So I started my career working for Lehman Brothers and their private equity team in the summer of 2007. Their stock price was at an all-time high, everything was great. 15 months later, the stock price was at zero and the company was bankrupt. But I also made the commitment that I wanted to be a part of trying to save this business. And it was a really daunting, stressful, and uncertain period of time, but I wouldn't change it for anything. I learned a lot about myself, I learned a lot about business. Many of these lessons I still apply today, but I certainly hope to have to never go through something like that again.
Following the family business, when I started my first company, it's a parking lot sweeping company. So I was in the office seeing all the cam charges that, you know, we were paying to these other sweeping companies. I said, hey, you know, that gave me a green light. I said, I should start my own business. So I started small. I started just focusing on our shopping centers, just doing a few at a time. And then, you know, once I got the grip of things, I actually took over and started sweeping all of our properties. And that got me to make the mistakes I needed to make to succeed. Success comes with mistakes.
The first full-time hire I had, I started the business young, and so I asked him, okay, how much money do you need monthly, you know, so I can get you to quit your job? And he's like, $6,000. And I go, thinking in my head, I go, okay. I call my dad, and I'm like, hey, I got the first hire, we're good, I got a salesman, $6,000 a month. He's like, Britton, it's $72,000 a year, you don't have that. And I kind of thought to myself, oh my gosh, I didn't think about that. Obviously it worked out, and he's still with me. So just a story that will always stick with me.
Growing up, one of the many qualities that I admired the most about my father was his acts of kindness toward people. Back in the early 2000s, we had a new family that moved into our neighborhood, and at the time we had owned 2 restaurants. My father had prepared dinner for the family at the restaurant, and he had taken my siblings and I over to their house and introduced ourselves, saying, welcome to the neighborhood, we're the Dhillon family, if there's anything you ever need, let us know. Fast forward to today, that family just so happens to be Chad Johnson, the CEO of Lady Jane's, who moved to Michigan with his family to start one barber shop, which has now grown into the largest corporately owned men's haircut franchise.